This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. Laura Bennett with you, looking through the archives into some of our favourite conversations from the year over this Christmas period. Today, hearing from nurse and mentor Gabi Macaulay. She has been around the world and here in Australia supporting others. In our conversation, she spoke about the importance of presence, being connected to family, which at this time of year is of particular importance. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, joining you as we learn from our guests how to become better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and deal with some of the stuff that can get in the way of that. You can rate this podcast, subscribe wherever you're listening. I'd love to hear from you. If you like old school emails, reach out undistracted@hope1032.com.au or find me on Instagram at laura.bennett_. Some of the most committed hard workers we have seen in the last couple of years have been in healthcare systems around the world, which is why it brings me so much joy to hear the story of Gabi Macaulay. Gabi is the president of Nurses Christian Fellowship Australia, an organisation focused not only on medical care, but the holistic wellbeing of patients. Gabi has travelled to disaster zones around the world with her work, and to me she's an example of someone who has taken a passion to care for people and turned it into a meaningful career with far-reaching impact. In this conversation, we talk about how to make crossroad decisions, the qualities of a lifelong learner, and what the effect of spirituality is on our physical healing. Let's welcome Gabi to Undistracted.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's a pleasure.
We're going to be diving into a little bit of the work that you do with Nurses Christian Fellowship Australia, some of your story behind that. So for those who may not be so familiar with what Nurses Christian Fellowship do, can you just give us a sense of your organisation and your involvement there?
For sure. Nurses Christian Fellowship started actually as a movement, and actually it started in 1913, so in fact a long time ago. So there's a long history of just extraordinary people whose shoulders we stand on, to quote a many-versed quote. But there have been many people that have gone before us and really set a beautiful standard on how to interact, how to support each other, how to be practical and prayerful in ministry as Christian nurses and midwives in the hospital setting or community setting or wherever we might be. So that's our aim.
Yeah, and that combination of faith, of your Christian beliefs and the work that you do as a nurse, why is bringing the two things together important to you?
Because I think we can provide better holistic care for people. And it's interesting, I teach on how to give spiritual care for patients of all faiths. So it's not a matter of you must become a Christian in your healing process, obviously, by any stage. But in fact, what are your values and how can I facilitate you empowering yourself to care for that part of your healing process? And one of the things I love is that there's evidence-based research now worldwide that says if we as healthcare professionals, in fact, acknowledge that spiritual care is part of the whole person healing, then we have people, in fact, discharged earlier, which I find amazing. Wow. Fewer infections, lesser use of antibiotics, and patients don't what we call bounce. In other words, they get discharged and then they bounce back because they were discharged a little bit early. So, in fact, our standards of practice require now that we treat the patient holistically, so physically and mentally and psychologically as well as spiritually. So it should be incorporated into our care, but the nursing culture is such that people don't want to offend patients, they don't want to overstep or invade privacy. And so we're just trying to find that balance of what's appropriate and yet what does in fact give holistic care to our patients. And the other thing for me is care for our colleagues as well. We have a very high suicide rate in young female doctors, nurses and midwives. And so I want to care for our colleagues as well. Obviously we've had a full-on couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's taken all sorts of tolls. So
Yeah, it's intense. And I think probably that intensity and some of the way that it would mean so many nurses, doctors are just so time poor, surely that would have an impact on what kind of holistic care they can make available, and maybe the level of attentiveness toward people's spiritual concerns throughout some of their health challenges. Why do you think it is that awareness of the spiritual dimension of health and well-being has such a positive impact on people? You know, as you say, it's improving healing rates, it's improving that lack of bounce, as you put it. Why is the spiritual component having that impact?
I think we've had a culture where we've compartmentalized everything. You know, we put everything into algorithms and logarithms and frameworks and structures and flow charts. But I really think at the end of the day, we are body, mind, spirit, you know. And I think when we are healing, all three of those are walking a journey. All three of our pathways are. And so how we integrate that into our nursing is, I guess, is the challenge there. So I think rather than just saying, well, it's the fractured humerus or the heart attack or something, I think asking the questions behind is really important. You know, this is, you seem very, very frightened about this. Can you tell me more? And people will say, yes, my dad died of a heart attack at this age. So then suddenly it opens up a whole new vulnerability to say, I understand now why you are concerned. What else can I do for you? So it just provides a bigger picture if we tend the body, mind, and spirit, not just the body.
Yeah, and I think if any of us were in a sticky situation, we would want a nurse like you to be there by our bedside. I think I can, you know, you can hear it in what you're saying. There would be such ease and sensitivity to the way that you approach your patients. And to be a nurse, I think, does require a unique kind of interest and care for people. When did nursing become the thing that you really wanted to do and give your life to?
I think early on, I decided I either wanted to do, it was a classic, wasn't it? I either wanted to do teaching or nursing. And so now I find myself teaching nurses, which is interesting because the alternative would be nursing teachers. So I love teaching and I've loved nursing. And I think I was always going to do something alongside people in one way or another. And in many ways, it sort of fell into nursing. However, I've loved where it's taken me, and I've loved coming alongside the rich and the poor and the young and the old and ethnicities, and it's just health is cross-cultural, it's across everything. And so it gives you a space when someone is really vulnerable. They're in labor and they're very scared they're going to lose their baby, or you know, when someone draws their last breath, it's a very vulnerable time in someone's life. So I think it's a real privilege for us to be there and to care for that person as much as we can. So for me, I think nursing, I did go into it pretty much straight after school.
How does it affect you when you're there alongside somebody in one of their most vulnerable moments? How does it impact you personally?
Well, I guess again, I see it as I've always believed that Ephesians 2:10, that you are positioned, you are crafted for the conversations put ahead for you, for the places that the Lord has put you in. And so for me, I've probably taken that too literally, but I do believe it. And so even if we don't have all the skill set in the world, we still have that ministry of presence that says, you know what, you matter to me, I care for you, and what's going on for you is important. You know, you're valued, you have a voice in your healthcare directives. And I think coming alongside people has been something that I have really valued, and I've had patients kind enough to say, you know what, that really meant a lot to me. And sometimes you know, that keeps me going through all sorts of circumstances that I've got myself into over the last 30 years of nursing.
No, it's precious. And you are impacting a lot of people, whether they're here in Sydney, in New South Wales, or whether it is around the world. Because one of the things I appreciate about what you do as a nurse is you take your skill set into some of the more challenging circumstances, whether it's through the COVID pandemic. You've been there with people offering care overseas. You've been part of support offered in some circumstances within the Ukraine. Why is that international impact something that you include in the work that you do?
Well, it's sort of ironic because when I decided to do nursing, I had a bit of a conversation with God and said, I'm happy to do nursing, but you need to know right now, in my 18 years of wisdom at the time, I will not be doing mission work. I just needed to be very, very clear about that. And this is not one of those jokey conversations with God. However, as I matured and realized that, actually maybe there's wider doors open for me if I sometimes, if you take some of those words and thoughts back out of your mind. And so as circumstances happened, I have ended up working in Papua New Guinea on the medical ships, on the YY medical ships, and then up in the Ukraine. And once again, health affects everybody. So I feel like it's been lovely to come alongside people in their crisis wherever they are in the world. And so for me, that's been, I think I probably get as much as I give from it. I'm very grateful for what my patients have taught me along the way too. We're all learning. So
who are some of the people that you've met in those places that have really stood out to you that you most remember?
I guess one of the ladies that I met in the Ukraine had just left the Mariupol Children's Theatre, and that was a direct hit. And I think that story will always stick in my heart. And I feel very blessed to have been there for her. And although it's a long story, the very end of it is I'd looked after her wounds and all that kind of stuff. And I said to her at the very end, may I just give you a hug? And she was obviously terribly frightened. She was terribly anxious. You can imagine stress levels. And then she said, yes. And then she pushed me away a little bit. And then she said, where are you from? She was quite bewildered. And I said, well, I'm from Sydney, Australia. And she said, quite confused, she said, you've come from Sydney, Australia, just to hold me.
Wow.
And I said to her, yes, I think I have. And she said, well, then would you hold me for a long time? And so it's the little things. There's no nursing skill involved in holding someone, but the position that I was in meant that I could literally just give a lady that I will never meet again on the other side of the world a hug, just a woman-to-woman, safe space hug. And for me, that will carry for a long time. And that's actually all it was. It wasn't a bunch of incredibly complex medical skills at all.
Yeah.
It was a hug.
But that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful, just that exchange, the humanity in that, and the way that what you're doing with your professional skill enables you to connect with people on such an individual, unique level.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as I say, I've felt very blessed, I think, in the circumstances that I've been put in. And I think sometimes, when I'm working on medical ships, there's a lot going on culturally that I'm unaware of. So one of my biggest things is, as I come towards the end of a consult, is actually searching through my mind, what question haven't I asked and what haven't I seen that I need to see? And that's sort of always my checkpoint to go, well, what else is going on that actually may be well more important than the situation in front of me, or the broken leg, or the chest pain, or the pulmonary embolus, or something. What actually else is going on that I need to see?
Yeah. How do you develop? I mean, this may be too practical. I may want this to be more practical than maybe it is. But how do you develop that intentionality? Because in the midst of all of our jobs, there is a task we have to achieve, and then I think behind it sometimes there is this thinking we want to bring to it. Have I seen everything I meant to have seen? How can I impact the people that I'm working with, perhaps? But in the moment, I think we can get so caught up in the task in front of us, the injury in front of us in your case, that we lose that line of questioning, I suppose. How have you been able to be so intentional and put those checks in place so that you are bringing that deeper aspect to your work in the midst of every other aspect of it?
A couple of things. Firstly, there's probably a bazillion that I've missed. So let's probably be clear about that. I'm not the perfect nurse. And secondly, I just wonder sometimes if it's just a bit of maturity and age to ask outside of just the trauma in front of us. And I'm also not afraid, I think, of the answer. I think sometimes we have a fear of, well, I won't be able to answer that, so I'm not going to ask. So I'll just stay on my task focus. Whereas I think I have quite a soft heart to say, well, I understand that this trauma means more to you than what I'm seeing. And so I choose to engage in that empathy factor and hearing how that empowers them. I think everybody, we all bring who we are and every experience that we've had to each conversation, don't we? We're not just that sort of two-dimensional person, but the rest of who we are into that conversation, whether it be in a resus ward, or whether it's out in the community or helping a labouring woman. I think all the things that have gone before me and within me are brought to that point where I can bring a gentleness and a kindness to someone's chaos, and I choose to do so perhaps because I've just had a little bit more life. And I've also realised, I think, that to stay in the moment with someone, to hold their hand and to really hear them means more than perhaps I realised when I was 18.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that dedication to being present is actually, so crucial. It's so important. And listening to you, it's clear you're in the right thing. You're doing the right job for who you are. You're the right person in the right place. But in those early days where you're choosing what career to pursue, you mentioned it was teaching, it was nursing. And from what you've told me previously, I mean, your parents worked as journalists. It's not like you were raised in this kind of setting. It would be, I think, so unfortunate if you hadn't found your way into nursing. So at those times where you're at a crossroads trying to make a decision, how did you get clarity on what direction you should pursue when there's so many other options and so many other kind of influences around you?
I think for me, I probably wasn't all that prayerful at the time. I made the decision to do nursing and then put one foot in front of the other. And I think too, perhaps one of my things has always been to go ahead and ask the question. I ended up on helicopter retrievals. Now, I only did that because I asked, and some of the opportunities I had has simply been saying, I'm really keen to find out about medical ships. Would any of my skill set help out? I'm really keen to help out on acute trauma rescue. How would I find out about that? So I think sometimes just knocking on the doors, my parents always said the worst they can do is say no. And I was okay with that. Having said that, people are keen when someone is teachable and someone wants to learn and said, get to a new situation. So teach me everything that you know so that I can then go forward and keep teaching on from that perspective. So I think I've not been afraid to knock on doors, and I've not been afraid if they've said, well, no, this situation, or we don't need more staff or whatever it would be. So I've been okay in my own self-confidence, I guess, to at least just find out if my skill set would work.
Do you think you've maintained those two qualities of teachability and knocking on doors throughout the rest of your life so far, or were they qualities that were more there from a sort of youthful season of life?
I think I say to all my students when they go out, they say, quick, what do I need to know? And I said, you know what, people want you to be teachable. And so whether you're a new grad or whether you're 100 years old like me, to remain teachable, I think, is a really fine quality. I will never stop learning from people either older or younger than me in their story. So I think that has been a really important part of widening opportunities, because people notice that and people say, oh gosh, she was great with the helicopter retrievals. Maybe we could try this sort of thing. So yeah, it's been good.
It's a quality to keep. And it's interesting to me that you say that you weren't necessarily so prayerful back then. You just kind of followed your intuition. You followed what you were interested in. Many of us, when we come to this idea of calling and purpose that we talk about on this podcast, I think we can look at it with a real weight, and we can kind of approach it with this heaviness, like I have to seek this out. I have to find what it is. I must get the vision from God, or, whatever. But do you think that our natural curiosities, our intuition, our personality can take us down the road we're meant to walk without necessarily that kind of weightiness that we may think we need, if that makes sense?
Yeah, look, I think a light heart, I'm sure there's some Bible verse somewhere about his burden is light, or his yoke. So for me, look, part of that's personality. So for some people, they need that weight, I think. It needs to be a heavy burden. For me, that wasn't my story. It was just what I passionately loved. It was like if somebody said, do you want to jump on a ship for 2 weeks and go and do some primary health care? I'm like, yes, pick me. Doesn't mean I'm able, but I am willing. And so I think being present and being able to show that side of things is helpful. For me, I don't think it's ever been, even going to the war, I felt it was harder for my family than it was for me, is the truth. And none of that is naive or ignorant. It just is a reality of what the story is. But for me, there wasn't a tremendous weight in that. In fact, I was very happy to go. And I say that because I went with a company that was very careful about safety and all that sort of thing. So at no point in the time in Ukraine did I feel that this was heavy or hard work. I felt positioned. I felt strategically positioned. I felt cared for. I felt loved. And out of all of that, you can just give tenfold and tenfold and tenfold. Yeah, for me, it's not a weighty kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's a valid thing you bring up about your family's response to the work that you were doing, because it would be almost naive of us to think that whatever passion, whatever pursuit we're going after, that we can run after it just with complete independence and abandonment for the people around us and just chase after it with all our heart. There are commitments. There are, for some of us, kids and spouses that are on the journey with us. For you, how important was it to get the support of your family before you stepped out and did these kind of things that in their eyes were a little bit more risky?
Yeah, actually, I've got a good example. I said to, we've got a son, a daughter-in-law, and a daughter, and we did say to them earlier on when we were considering going to Mozambique, and there was Ebola, and we did have the family, the Brady Bunch talk when everyone gathers and said, how are we feeling about all this? And interestingly, my son and daughter-in-law said, absolutely go, because essentially we were saying, I may not come back. Ebola is a full-on disease. You hemorrhage out pretty fast. I just need to be clear about what, about having your blessing. So my son and daughter-in-law said, absolutely go. We love you. If something happens to you, we'll know that you went doing what you love doing. You're passionate about it, your career. My daughter said, absolutely not. You are not going, Mum. So we kind of came around to that. And as it turned out, that particular trip was cancelled. But it was a good preempt to see how people gauge it, because it matters to me if it is really upsetting people back home.
Yeah, would you have not gone, like if the no was so firm, do you think you would have not gone, or would you have wanted them to see, hey, I am really passionate about this, can we step over this fear together?
Yeah, I think we would have. And I think it would have been a matter of spelling out, because my husband said, look, if something happens to you, I can't get to you. And I said, I appreciate that, but the American army will be getting to me and they've probably got a better chance than you, much as I love you and you're protected. And so having sort of some further conversations to the what if questions, all those what if something happens, what if the bomb hits, what if, and so being as much as possible, being able to say, well, these are all the contingency plans. This is what happens. This is the exit strategy. So those were important conversations to have alongside as well. And obviously, as they've grown in that first responder stuff, they have also learned to trust the system and trust decisions made by people that they will never meet. And so it's been a growth journey, I guess, for all of us in that process. But I am very respectful. And I think genuinely, if a family member said absolutely not, and actually in the training, they're quite clear about that too. They say your family is more important. There will always be another disaster. And I kind of love that in the training. They were very respectful that we stay a good witness within our context. And I think that mattered a lot to my family.
Yeah, that's significant, because within these fields, I suppose, that people can go into with a Christian faith underpinning their work, whether that is the way you look at nursing or people that are in full-time ministry, these sorts of things, there are sadly so many instances where family comes second, and it kind of undermines the beauty and the purpose of the work that you or, the minister, whoever, are doing because of that hole that is left behind.
Yeah, I think for me and my husband, we needed to weigh up how to have those conversations and who to have those conversations with. And I had some hilariously unhelpful conversations with texts really from friends way further out on my circle of influence or friendship circles, whatever you call it, who I thought, golly, if the text that you've sent me, if that's the last text I ever read from you, is pretty heart melting.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah. And so, you kind of have to learn to balance that response. And I will always believe the ones that sent me some texts basically saying you are completely mad, I will always know their intention, where that came from was truly a heart of love. It didn't arrive that way, but by the time I'd sort of unpacked it and gone, okay, like I get that your heart is actually really concerned about the bigger picture. So I had nearly everybody was very, very supportive, but the odd person that just went, you're crazy.
Yeah. And it is because they love you. Like often our friends and family do the wildest stuff because they love us. But it's clear, you were able to find your own sense of peace and direction that gave you the confidence to make the choices that you have in your career. Where do you find that peace and that boldness?
I think I'm wired that way a little bit. There's probably personality in that. Probably I'm a little bit type A. And so I'm certainly wired to get on to the next thing, do the next thing. I don't find, so the boldness for me, sort of in those days leading up to before going, is a lot of organisation and getting the next thing done in order to be present when I'm there.
And the peace aspect, where does that come from for you?
The peace is, again, I don't want to sound tacky, but I feel very loved by a lot of people, and I think that does give you some inner peace. I'm very confident in who I am in Christ. Doesn't mean that I'm overly skilled. I just know that I'm walking in the path that is okay for him, for me to walk in. And so I think the peace is rooted in my faith. I'm also quite strategic, if this makes sense. When I do go off on these things, I have got about 6 girlfriends and I change them around and say to them, look, honestly, I don't know what I'm going into. Would you have my back in prayer? And that would mean, I'm very specific, could you shoot me a text from time to time? Could you shoot me a Bible verse or an image or a picture? Or even just tell me a stupid story of what you're doing in the day? And those have really kept me going. So that gives me that sustainability, not to think I've just been forgotten and abandoned. And I'll get something in the middle of the night that's about this crazy thing happening with a girlfriend in Canberra. and it's just the right thing at the right time to go, oh my gosh, that just rebalanced. I just refound my north again.
Yeah, you need the right support people around you. I think we all need that. A community becomes so important. And I think one of the privileges of your job is that you do get to meet people, as I mentioned earlier, in sticky situations for sure, but I think there's a vulnerability in the conversations you then get to have with people. And we hear so often about people who end up reflecting on a life when it seems like they may not get to keep theirs, and as you've been in those circumstances, whether it's somebody, with a heart attack or a terminal illness, whatever the circumstance may be, what are some of the things that you speak to them about that they bring up that cause you to reflect on life? Are they talking regrets? Are they talking things they wish they did or didn't do in those moments?
I think perhaps those conversations in trauma, you need to reflect back to see there's actually dignity. There's something called a dignity therapy. So I kind of do a condensed version of that. What is it that you want people to remember about you? What is important to you? And then having some idea medically as to how long you've got to actually pull this off for them. Is this somebody that I can call, or is there somebody I could FaceTime? They won't mind that it's in the middle of the night. It's in England. This is an unusual situation. So I think often empowering people to enact what they would really like to do if it's in a short period of time. And I think you have to think fast on your feet and get pretty direct questions and very direct answers. And in a trauma situation, I think I'm not afraid to drill down quite deep, sensitively, but quite deep quickly. And generally the patient will pick up that I'm on their side. Let's do this together.
Yeah.
So that we can get done what otherwise might not get done.
Yeah.
And so thinking kind of outside the box for, well, what are the physical needs? What are the spiritual needs that are important? What's important to you right now is one of my questions. And one of the other ones I'll tend to say is, how's your head? How's your heart? And those can open up that open-ended question, those dialogues that say, well, actually, I haven't spoken to my son. Then it's, chasing down some of those things intentionally.
Yeah.
As if they're the only person that matters in the world right now.
Well, it feels like it sounds like you're helping them create their kind of, life's final to-do list and finding the best way to actually tick all the things off of that list. And for people listening right now who are perhaps thinking about how they best live their life, however long each of us have got left, if you're somebody who wants to not reach the end, having this list of things where you go, oh my gosh, I didn't do that and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. What are the kind of questions you think we should be asking ourselves to get an understanding of what sort of things are important to us and what kind of ways we do want to spend whatever remaining time we have on earth,
Yeah, actually, you just answered it in your own question. One of my questions is, what is important to you right now? Because I would assume X, Y, and Z, and then they may well say something like that, my dog has a good life, something that just takes you by surprise. You think, oh, okay, so let me walk down that road with you. But as I say, very direct questions. What is important to you right now? And I think that often guides how we can then care for them in the bigger story, as I say, not just the heart attack and I must say I have been surprised by people when I've asked that question, what is important to you right now? Because we tend to just assume that the hemorrhaging or the blood pressure or the this or the that is important. It's important to us, but that's not the number. That's not important to them. And so I think perhaps the shortest answer to that is exactly that. What's kept you strong in the past? What's important to you right now? How can I help you do this? And often people will come up with, with the start of a pathway, of a journey that we can actually then continue, lift it up and put it on its tracks.
It's just been such a pleasure chatting with you, Gabi, and I'm sure there's more we could talk about, but I want to finish with a question that I ask all of our guests on this podcast. It's called Undistracted. We talk to you about how we can live in pursuit of our passions, our purpose, deal with some of the stuff that can get in the way of that. And it's really clear to me that you have spent a lot of your life doing these things that are so important to you. How can we each live an undistracted life? What does it take from your perspective to live in focused pursuit of these things we each believe we're called to do in life?
I think the first thing I'd say is actually just write down, what are you passionate about? Because otherwise we just bumble into routine. I think one of the greatest problems in our world is complacency. So we just do routine for the sake of it. So keeping ourselves on track. I've often said to girls that I mentor at the end of each year, just want you to have a think about 2 things that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. It's not really on your plate to do. And 2 things that you could pick up. So it's basically a prayer time with the Lord to say, what is it that I'm doing that it's not really for me to do? And what are 2 things? What are 2 things you want me to lay down? What are 2 things you want me to pick up for next year? And so I think, kind of keeping yourself in check and on point and having girlfriends with a similar, perhaps direction, keeping ourselves on the tracks, allow yourself to go off. That's okay. But just so long as you've got people that will say, keep you focused on what God is doing in your life, focused on your faith, how's that playing out in your prayer life? How's that playing out in how you go to the marketplace each day? It's easy enough to go to church to be the Christian, but when you actually go out into a resus trauma, it's a very different story.
Yeah.
And so, when you've got the backing of good friends, good faith, good family, I'm finding it easier and easier to then go out into the trauma scene and love out of an overflow, I guess, of that. So
yeah, loving accountability sounds like it's a really important part of the picture. But Gabi, again, thank you so much for joining us on Undistracted. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me indeed.
Accountability is one of those things so many of our guests have said that they need, we all need in life to some degree. And I think especially in Gabi's context, when you're doing something that pushes yourself beyond your own limits, that has inherent risk with it, you do need to know that there are people in your corner championing you, supporting you, and sometimes, yes, calling you out when you need that as well. It's a great moment to consider, who are those people in our lives? Do we have them? Should we be that person for somebody else? I hope you got something out of what Gabi shared. Would love to hear from you on Instagram at laura.bennett_. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe to this podcast, share it with a friend, and until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.